Fellow South Africans, as we look forward to tomorrow's medium-term budget policy statement, it is critical that we do not have another budget pronouncement that fails to miss the mark. With unemployment, inequality and poverty at an all-time high, it is imperative that the Minister of Finance's address presents workable solutions as opposed to well-worn promises that too often remain just that, promises. With an estimated 10 million people being unemployed today and more than 50% of households going to bed hungry tonight, there is no doubt that as a country we stand at a crossroads. We need a clear path towards a fiscally sustainable future that uplifts every South African, particularly the millions who remain vulnerable on the margins of a stagnant economy defined by low growth, rising debt, and a lack of investments and opportunities. At its very core, the Minister's budget policy statement must resonate with the urgency of our time. So today, I stand before you on behalf of ActionSA, a party committed to fixing South Africa, to outline the critical areas that need urgent attention in the Minister of Finance's speech tomorrow. First and foremost, let's talk about the South African Revenue Services. We expect the government to fall short on its revenue collection target in the current fiscal year, and we maintain that this can be directly attributed to the chronic underfunding of SARS. Worryingly, when measured against international benchmarks, SARS is underfunded by 5.6 billion, more than 30%. The consequences of this underfunding are twofold. Firstly, it hampers SARS's ability to collect the full tax revenues owed to the government. Given that SARS collects more than 90% of government's revenue and with an estimated tax gap of 800 billion, it is outstanding that the agency is not being adequately resourced, which is akin to the government biting the hand that feeds you. Secondly, underfunding allows the illicit economy to thrive. The rise of the illicit economy not only drains billions in tax revenue, but also stifles economic growth, discourages foreign investment, and undermines business confidence. ActionSA understands that the 5.6 billion underfunding cannot be remedied overnight. Therefore, we recommend an additional 3 billion be allocated to SARS of the medium-term expenditure framework to improve revenue collection and clamp down on illicit trade. Next, South Africa's public debt is simply unsustainable. With debt levels expected to reach 5.4 trillion by the end of the current financial year, it is not just an abstract number, it represents billions in interest payments that could have gone to essential services like healthcare, schools, and clean water. Almost 20 cents of every rand collected by SARS goes to paying interest on debt, over $1 billion a day. This is unacceptable, and yet the government has no credible plans to bring the debt under control. ActionSA is clear that austerity is not the answer. It targets the wrong areas. Rather, focus must be on ending wasteful spending as a priority. We cannot mortgage our children's future just to keep paying for a bloated and inefficient state. Speaking of inefficiencies, the bloated cabinet is a prime example of this government's fiscal mismanagement. We have an executive comprising 32 ministers and 43 deputy ministers. Countries with larger populations and economies operate with smaller, more streamlined, efficient, and less costly cabinets. Not only is this bloated cabinet extremely expensive, inefficient, and a waste of scarce government resources, but importantly, it also sends the wrong signals to all those employed by the state and public entities. How can the Minister of Finance and others in the National Executive tell others to spend resources better when you are part of the problem? You cannot tell people to tighten their belts when your own belt is getting considerably looser. ActionSA calls on the President and the Finance Minister to reduce the size of the Cabinet, reduce the associated billion rand perks, streamline the Executive, and redirect those funds to where they are needed most, in service delivery. No society can function without law and order. And as we have recently seen with the mass murders in Lesikisiki in the Eastern Cape and the rape and murder of a 6-year-old girl in Soweto last year, lawlessness is tearing our communities apart. Yet our police force remains woefully underfunded. ActionSA contends that government is asking our police officers to do the impossible, work in a climate of rising crime with fewer resources, and every year, all whilst being paid underpaid. South Africans are crying out for safety. A call we believe demands that the Finance Minister allocates additional funding to frontline policing, ensuring they are properly equipped, trained, and deployed in high-risk community areas across the country. This is also the time to evaluate whether government is serious about combating corruption. We need to reinstate the Scorpions and an independent anti-corruption agency, a critical tool in addressing the high levels of corruption that has plagued our government. Growth-centric economies feature infrastructure investments as a top priority, which is why we are also deeply concerned about the lack of strategic investment and focus on public works and infrastructure. Roads and rail networks are crumbling, ports are inefficient, water systems are failing, and service delivery has become unreliable in many parts of the country, where critical economic infrastructure is either deteriorating or lacking entirely. Consequently, this decline strangles growth and limits opportunities for South Africans, highlighting the urgent need for ramped-up investments in our infrastructure. Therefore, tomorrow, we expect to hear about tangible plans to increase public infrastructure investments. This is just not about repairing what is broken. It's about creating jobs and getting the economy moving. We need an infrastructure-led recovery that prioritizes long-term development and sustainable growth. Turning to Home Affairs, we must confront the financial burden associated with illegal immigration. While the deportation process is a necessary expense, its rising cost, which should not be borne by taxpayers, places significant strain on an already overstretched department. While we believe in upholding the rights of all people, the reality is that unchecked migration is unsustainable and places far too great a burden on the fiscus. Government must allocate adequate resources to Home Affairs, not only to handle deportations effectively, but also to secure our borders and ensure a functioning immigration system that protects our country. Lastly, education is a cornerstone of any prosperous nation. Yet, owing to budget cuts across the country, we are seeing thousands of teacher jobs being slashed, with provinces like the Western Cape expected to lose 2,400 teachers over the next year. This senseless decision disproportionately affects those trying to provide quality education under difficult circumstances. How can we expect our children to thrive when the resources they need are being stripped away? Instead of cutting education budgets, we should be spending more in training and retaining quality teachers. Our children deserve the best start in life, and we must prioritize education funding across the country. In closing, let me be clear. As a constructive opposition, ActionSA stands ready to hold this government accountable and provide the necessary solutions to get South Africans back on track towards growth. Tomorrow's budget is not just a set of numbers, it represents choices that will either lift South Africans out of despair or push them further into hardship. South Africans deserve a government that serves the people, not itself. I thank you.